retailers are just the beginning because there are many players in the ecosystem, from brands and distributors to CPGs to logistic providers, retail
Right.
media platforms, who all need the kind of shelf level visibility and real-time information that we provide. And as you look into the future, or as we look into the future, um, in an era of social commerce and, agentic commerce, et cetera, like, we know that every major commerce channel follows an S curve. There's slow adoption and then there's rapid acceleration, which is where we are right now. And each of those inflection points rewrites the rules.
Hey, everybody. JW Franz here with TRG, back again with conversations on retail on the Beyond the Barcode series. Happy to be here once again to host you all and to have another very exciting conversation. This one for me is one that I will say is quite new and even more exciting, not because those previous topics, those previous guests were anything less, but this is certainly something that's a little bit newer for me as it relates to conversations extending beyond RFID. And we know that with this series Beyond the Barcode, certainly RFID has been a core focus, and it will continue to represent itself here and there. And I have a feeling it might even come back again today in this conversation, but really just want to kind of jump a bit more into how complementary technologies, with RFID or without, specifically in the areas of robotics, are really helping provide retailers with a very diverse tool set today to really help automate store operations as a part of store intelligence. And, we really have talked a lot about inventory management for on-shelf availability, but then you really kind of think beyond that and get into how robotic solutions that then encompass technologies around computer vision and IoT sensors, along with AI. There's really a lot of cool stuff going on these days, and I think that with today's guest here, that you're going to learn a lot, as I know I certainly will. So let's just jump right into it, and I want to introduce my guest, Caitlin Allen, Senior Vice President of Market from Simbe Robotics. And Caitlin, I'm really excited to have you with us here today. I know that you're going to share a lot of information that's certainly new to me, and certainly I have no doubt that our listeners are going to be equally interested. So thank you for joining me. First off, really appreciate your time. I know you're busy and you're traveling, but thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, JW. And I've got to say, I think a lot of this is new for a lot of us. I wasn't new to retail, but I was new to robotics when I joined Simbe 2 years ago. And I think that, well, I know that the first time that many shoppers see our robot tally in stores, this is our first introduction to robotics in a public space, in many global settings. So I think we're all among friends in terms of this being a new topic.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to talking about some of those newer exposures. I follow what you all put on LinkedIn and see a lot of public interest in things like Tally. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. Before we get into it, though, could you just maybe take a few minutes and further introduce yourself and certainly Simbe? I know that, like I said, a lot of our listeners are probably not familiar with you or your organization, and love to kind of understand kind of where you fit today in this whole world of retail.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Caitlin Allen, based in San Francisco, California, currently in Boston, Massachusetts. I lead marketing at Simbe, where I was the first hire about 2 years ago in the function. And I'll dive more into both my career and Simbe, but Simbe stands for simulated being, just for those that are curious what it means. To introduce myself first, JW. So my 20-year career has focused on what I'll call building markets for disruptive technology companies. And that's happened across the healthcare technology space, enterprise SaaS, consumer platforms, and now deep technology like robotics. I started my career in the nonprofit world, creating markets for medical technology, and then founded and scaled and ultimately sold a marketing firm that put companies like LinkedIn and Google for Work on the map. And after that, I was at Andreessen Horowitz, which is a venture capital portfolio company. And since then, I like to say I've found my sweet spot leading early and growth stage companies to public scale, including Lyft and Happy Returns, where I was part of the executive team at both companies, one leading Lyft through IPO, and then the second scaling Happy Returns to acquisition by PayPal and then ultimately UPS. As for Simbe, so you have probably seen, we've already mentioned on this conversation, our flagship product, Tally, which was introduced to the world in, I think it was 2018 or 2017 as the world's first autonomous inventory robot.
Okay.
And today it's in 9 countries and 3 continents and 6 sectors. So it's grown in presence. And we started as a robotics company. We are still a store intelligence company based on robotics, but we've actually grown in the last decade into the only vertically integrated physical AI company. And that means that we're the only retail tech company that combines computer vision and robotics and RFID and fixed sensors in one platform. And, maybe to talk about the why we exist a bit, retailers are the crucial link between the products and the people who want to buy those products. But oftentimes, because of status quo solutions that involve, manual inventory audits that are led by store teams, those retailers lack ground truth about what's actually going on inside of their store. And really simple questions can be really hard to answer, like what's in my store and where is it and is it for sale and what price is it at? Is it the right price? And like I mentioned, the reason that exists today is because of the traditional way of checking inventory and price tags is that still store teams have had to walk up and down aisles, and that's boring work. It's hard to do boring work well, and those kind of repetitive tasks are actually one of the top reasons that retail workers quit their jobs so often. So what our platform has the honor and the privilege of doing is digitizing the shelf to surface the highest priority issues that are going to impact the shopper's experience and also impact things like store efficiency and store sales and margin, and then also give those store teams back hours every week so that they can spend more time serving shoppers. And it's a really fun place to work. I think retail technology is at this incredible tipping point that we'll talk about throughout the course of this conversation, and just the privilege of being involved in making the shopping experience even better than it already is, which is something you and I do every day. We buy things almost every day. It's pretty fun. And when you think about how many physical goods there are in the world, and what we do then becomes a question of how much more can be sold and how much more efficiently can it be sold and how much more exponentially in the process can we improve the experience of shoppers or the retail workers that go to work every day and are the cornerstone of our communities. So that's a bit about me and a bit about the company.
Well, because the way coming in this again, I fully admit that I know far less than I know more in this space. But when I position, say in this example, Simbe to my colleagues, potential customers, whatever, when I introduce them, when I represent you as a robotics company, is that technically the wrong way? Like how would you? What would be, in all fairness, the best way to represent you today? Because you reference AI, store intelligence, but I come out and say robotics, but that's probably oversimplifying it and not doing its justice.
I mean, it's not wrong, GW, because I think robotics are the most cost efficient and most precise and effective way of digitizing the shelf.
Sure.
And so that's why we started in robotics. And then now that we have our fixed sensor Tally Spot, and then we have Tally RFID, which is for soft tagged apparel, it increases the level of store coverage. So I think robotics is not inaccurate. AI and automation might be accurate as well. It's really about the concept of digitizing the shelf and how to do that with technology that gives people back hours and gives people a better experience in the store.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's helpful. And real quick before we kind of go deeper into some of the core content, you said it here in your introduction, and whenever you and I just met for the first time a few weeks ago, you kind of said it in similar ways, which is you don't come from a extensive retail background. I mean, for me, I grew up in industrial manufacturing and found myself in retail just in the last few years. So, really, kind of, if you don't mind me asking, like, what was kind of like the tipping point, or what really drove you to really make this your focus here moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what happened was a recruiter who placed me at Happy Returns reached out and he said, "My favorite CEO of all time is hiring his first head of marketing. Do you want to meet him?"
Uh,
And in the moment, I was like, "Yeah, yeah, Joe, you say that to all the girls." But but what happened was when I met Brad Bagolier, our CEO, like it was immediately apparent to me that this is a very special leader. And so, that happened. There also, there's kind of in the startup world, there's some very clear markers of what quantifies product market fit. And it's, you know, really enthusiastic customers and the kind of the growth metrics and traction along those lines. And then I think too, JW, like, I'm sure this you or your wife, others in your friend group have experienced this dynamic, but it's really annoying to place an online order and have, like let's say you make an order with Instacart or DoorDash, and then 50% of the items you want delivered from the grocery store are substituted or not found. And it's similarly annoying to show up at a store and that one brand of yogurt, peanut butter, whatever it is that you're really picky about isn't there. And so I immediately got from like a global perspective how impactful this is going to be. And with my skill set, I'm a storyteller, I'm a strategist, I'm good at creating go-to-market mechanics that like take technology that's not on a P&L initially to then land it on one over time. And with my skill set, you don't need to be an expert. You actually need to like dumb things down into just like the human core components. And so, yes, I've had to learn a lot of things, and it's, it's been fun, and it was a little bit challenging. It's still challenging sometimes, but that's part of the joy of what I get to do. So, long-winded answer to your question, but that's how this came to be.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. One of the things I've liked about, getting more invested in the retail space over the years is I can go visit a customer any day of the week and I don't need to schedule a meeting. I can basically go in and see what they're living and breathing, and, have a chat with an associate if they're willing to chat. And it's always good experiences. So yeah, I can definitely relate in some ways. So, well, kind of, getting more deeper into this, and I like to kind of start at the top of the funnel and kind of go deeper in. But if we were to kind of just take maybe like a macro view, right? Take like the state of the market in automation, but specifically in as it relates to your world and the technologies that you're very familiar with as a part of store intelligence and retail shelf digitization. Always mess that word up. What does that can you give us like a timeline, like as it relates to the conception of I call AMRs, or advanced mobile robots in this place, and kind of like where it started and ultimately kind of like where we've gotten to. And obviously there's technology advancements, but there's certainly a market demand. And what was the market demanding for that the technology could or can now do? Like, can you just help me kind of illustrate what that timeline looks like from where things started up until now?
So you're putting me to the test to see if I've learned good things over the last 2 years.
Little put you on the spot.
It's funny. No, it's a wonderful place to start, JW, and thank you so much for the question. If we look back, the idea of AMRs, autonomous mobile robots, in retail, it took root about a decade ago. Retailers have been heavily invested in supply chain automation and point of sale systems and e-commerce systems for a long time, but the store interior, meaning what happens between the time that a product arrives and the product leaves a store, or at that moment where a consumer is making a decision at the shelf of, am I going to buy this thing or not? That part of the store interiors has been a blind spot for most retailers. And it's the reason that it's hard to have ground truth and answer those very simple questions I was talking about earlier of like, where is my product? Is it at the right price? And is it available for sale? And that moment of truth, that is the moment of truth for shoppers and for retailers from a perspective of sales. So the first wave of autonomous mobile robots, including Simbe's Tally, emerged to close that gap. And early on, the focus was really simply, can a robot safely and autonomously navigate a dynamic retail environment with shoppers and carts and kids and displays moving around? And can it capture shelf data at scale?
Yep.
And, you know, it's a hard problem today. It was definitely a hard problem in 2015. And so the first big technological leaps were in navigation and autonomy, which involves computer vision, LiDAR, and obstacle detection. That allowed the AMRs to traverse really busy grocery aisles without disrupting the shopping experience. And then as that foundation solidified, the next advancements were really in data fidelity. And that gets to why robots are kind of the most precise, most cost-effective, most scalable solution in the market, and why things like fixed sensors or RFID technology, from our view, needs to be layered on top of that robotics foundation. The industry doesn't just need pictures of shelves, right? Like retail has a ton of data already. What is needed when you're digitizing the shelf is structured and actionable information that is surfaced as insights for the appropriate party. So if it's for store associates, that we need prioritized lists about what to go fix first. And that needs to be driven by the items that are sold most often in a store. If it's a manager, or someone that's looking across stores, they want to look at things like benchmarks and performance data and things along those lines. So those are just two examples. But over the years, the improvements in machine learning and computer vision and sensor function have really made it possible for AMRs to capture millions of SKUs with accuracy levels that surpass manual audits. And then at the same time, the market need has really sharpened. And I mean, I've seen this only in the last 2 years as I've been part of this segment of the industry. When I joined 2 years ago, folks, we really weren't even convinced that we had a problem with on-shelf availability or price accuracy. And that's really changed. That understanding is very pronounced today. And I think that it's been driven by things like labor shortages and high turnover and supply chain and economic volatility. I can keep going, but it's forced retail to look at how do we execute with more precision. And we'll talk about this later, but I think things that have helped this awareness grow are reports like the CoreSight study that have found that retailers are losing about 5.5% of revenue every year to store inefficiencies that are associated with manual human-based ways of working that technology can augment. And I guess the last thing I'll say, just kind of to bring us to today, JW, is, and I've loved being part of this tipping point, AMRs aren't novelties anymore, right? Tally, for instance, has been deployed in 9 countries and 6 retail sectors, like I've already said, and they work at scale across chain-wide deployments. And the technology now, like in our platform, it's not just robotics solitarily, but it's been integrated with fixed sensors for like high traffic or high turnover areas, and for RFID if there's apparel being sold. And it's not just available on desktop anymore. There are mobile applications on handhelds, et cetera, so that there's integration across systems in the retail tech stack that delivers what's needed from a data infrastructure perspective to power the modern AI strategy or initiatives that a retailer may have. So, I guess that was to kind of go summarize what I just said. Like, the journey's gone from can robots navigate to can they produce high quality data and insights to how do we scale and integrate that data to transform retail operations. And that's the super exciting moment that we're in right now.
Hearing what you just said, and obviously, I'm learning as we go in this conversation. Sounds like your timeline is still relatively small. If I think about, and I hate to do this, but I do a lot of comparison to RFID because that's just what I know and what I can translate to.
Of course,
the RFID timeline is much longer, and as I know you've heard people say, we're talking about the RFID timeline now, like in terms of like a hockey stick, right? It's had a long runway, and now it's spiking. But it sounds like your timeline is maybe different, based on the being a little bit newer technology, shorter timeline to market, but you're making some pretty significant advancements at the same time.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So in terms of kind of like what that timeline is. Now I know that again, it's a shorter timeline and not stretched out like the hockey stick, like I was saying, but where's kind of like the point of entry for retailers to utilize your technology? I historically have leveraged. I historically referenced inventory management or for OSA, things that you're familiar with, but is that like the starting point, or like what is the main point of entry? And then kind of like what are some of the main what are some of the ROI drivers they're trying to get out of that before they take on the next and the next thereafter?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think implicit in your question is the statement that there's a lot of applications for inventory data and inventory insights. But to your point, it's really important to start with focus and to have very clear KPIs in a focused time period that then can lead to other applications or use cases that scale that internal rate of return or ROI metric, depending upon what you're measuring. Typically, the first two use cases that we are looking at with our customers is either on-shelf availability or price accuracy. And that varies, and we'll talk about this more in the conversation, but that varies depending upon geography too, of what matters to the retailer. And we generally will sign multi-year contracts, but we begin those multi-year contracts with a proof of concept or a pilot, and they're paid engagements, but they focus on that starting KPI. And generally what we see in that 3 to 4 month time period is that 4x of the initial investment is returned in that 3 to 4 month time period.
Okay.
And then over time, that ROI scales to about 15x if the retailer is also replicating the use of shelf digitization for additional use cases. And so, that's really the value of starting off with a focused plan and then scaling it over time. I will say from an on-shelf availability perspective, in other words, keeping products available for shoppers, our clients see on average a 60% reduction in out of stocks. And then from a price and promotion accuracy perspective, we typically see about a 90% improvement in price accuracy. Now, that's not 90% accurate, it's 90% improvement, which is obviously a big difference. Sure. And then there are other benefits to JW that are, I would say, maybe they're secondary, just because they're not as tied to some of the KPIs that matter to retailers, but by no means are they less important. We tend to see teams rededicate up to 50 hours per store per week from manual audits to shoppers and interacting with them directly. And then, of course, all of those ladder up to very important KPIs like margin growth and sales lift.
Okay. No, very interesting. And I know, like I said, I've been on your website, kind of a lot at this point, and then, follow all the things you're sharing on LinkedIn. So you clearly called out inventory and pricing integrity, but I've also seen other things that are on your website, and maybe these are the secondary, the third or fourth, whatever, however you rank them, but you talk about planogram compliance and safety, spillage detection, and then even something seems to be more recent, which I know we're going to get into, which is more around product freshness and such. So where are those on your list of what's next?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it really gets into the value that shelf digitization can unlock across your business. And I'll actually share a slide really quick because I think that will help paint the picture a bit. You can see here on the bottom right the immediate use cases around out of stocks and inventory reduction, phantom inventory reduction, as well as price and promotion accuracy improvements. I talked as well about the labor reduction and reallocation. For clarity there, we have never seen a client. This isn't labor replacement. This is labor amplification and labor empowerment. And then over the medium term and the long term, we start to get into things like improving the accuracy of perpetual inventory, as well as merchandising and marketing execution. And then in the long term, you can start to do things like sell the data to your DSD or brand partners, and you start to monetize then there, and you can use what we call a realogram, which is what your shelf actually looks like, to improve your planogram and to then close the loop on retail media spend, et cetera, et cetera. So really, really a full a very long-term strategy. And I think one that's important to start, to your implicit point, from a crawl, walk, run perspective.
Right. Yeah.
And that's, we have a team of former retail consultants, JW, that are on our post-sale customer success teams, and they work with our clients to develop the client's unique strategy and business case in our sales process, and then to bring the value, to realize the value throughout the store deployment in the pilot and then thereafter. And so I think that's really core to the model, because every retailer is slightly different, and every retailer has slightly different goals and needs to prove value in a slightly different way. So that's part of our model on purpose. And maybe if I can go larger as well, we primarily sell right now, GW, to retailers, but retailers are just the beginning, because there are many players in the ecosystem, from brands and distributors to CPGs to logistic providers, retail media platforms, who all need the kind of shelf level visibility and real-time information that we provide. And as you look into the future, or as we look into the future, in an era of social commerce and, agentic commerce, et cetera, like, we know that every major commerce channel follows an S curve. There's slow adoption, and then there's rapid acceleration, which is where we are right now. And each of those inflection points rewrites the rules. And brick and mortar today is, I guess it's kind of analogous to where Blockbuster was in the Netflix era. Like, our next leap as an industry is not just about e-commerce, it's about social and agentic commerce. And that Netflix trifecta is going to change the game for us in a big way and become ubiquitous, such that the smart watches that we have, or the smart fridges we have at home, the voice assistants, the wearables, et cetera, will soon be in a world where stores aren't going to be guessing what shoppers need, but they'll be able to know with the right integration strategy. And will be like, our homes will be connected in a way with the store, in a living ecosystem that can learn and react and optimize itself to our personal preferences and, trust settings and all that kind of thing. So commerce will easily be able to flow between the home and the shelf and the supply chain in between. Right. So anyways, it's, there's a lot to come. And I think that's part of what's so exciting about being in this industry right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, hearing all this for the first time is really intriguing, and you took me by a pleasant surprise by sharing that graphic for a minute, because I thought that was very insightful, but also I think it translates. Well, it did translate to one of the questions I had, which is, what does that crawl, walk, run model look like? So I think you very clearly illustrated those three different tiers based on maturity. So thank you for that.
I'm glad.
Well, then, kind of taking that, that crawl, walk, run, and the maturity, and again, here's me coming back to comparing to RFID, and RFID, as we know, in this world, while it's had tremendous success, it's had a lot of bumps, lessons learned, and that's been across the supply chain and distribution in store. But as it relates to kind of your world, I mean, and taking a much condensed timeline, have you seen a few bumps that have really kind of impacted the adoption rate for I don't say for good or bad, but have you seen those bumps? And if you really haven't seen any bumps, I mean, have you seen something that's really kind of escalated or moved that timeline ahead further than you were expecting it to?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, like with any new technology, the path through robotics and retail has not been perfectly linear. Early on, retail really wondered whether robots could safely navigate busy aisles, whether store teams would embrace them. The media was concerned about labor replacement.
Right.
There was a question of whether data quality would actually justify the investment in something like robotics. And, what's really been exciting is to see some of those attitudes change. We have seen along the way, for instance, in certain stores, that it's best not to pilot, for instance, in a grocery store during a super busy season like the holidays.
Right.
But I would say that what's really been driving the acceleration, or the accelerated adoption, is three different things. The first is being is just the traction in a global setting, right? We're able to prove reliability at scale right now, and it's, it's kind of our herd mentality as humans. It feels a lot safer to go do something if someone's done it before you. And so the early innovators, the early champions that have brought Tally and Friends, Tally Spot, Tally RFID to 9 countries, to 6 sectors. Like, that's really been part of what's driven the global confidence that we're seeing now. And
Sure.
it doesn't hurt either that, experts like OmniTalk, Chris Walton, and Ann Mazenga have called this the year of the robot.
Yeah.
There's the second thing is, there's been a lot of work in our industry by some very smart people to develop clear business cases and clear paths to ROI. And, having a shared vision from the outset that has that focus, but can also scale over time, like we were talking about with a crawl, walk, run approach towards North Star KPIs. That's really important. And I think it underscores the importance of vendors like ourselves needing to not be order takers. In this environment, we can't be. We have to orient around potential value. And we're all doing this for the first time for the most part, which is why it's important to have a vendor or partner that's done it many times before and can help you think through, how does this apply to my business? And then the third really big unlock is positive human reception. And, and I think this has been one of the biggest surprises for, relative to what was maybe expected 10 years ago. One, we know that store teams are not replaced by this technology, but they love their jobs more and they do a better job. We have research within Simbe that shows that 90% of store managers prefer their jobs with Tally around and say that they wouldn't want their job without the robot there. Right. So that's a really big difference than I think what was expected at first. And then similarly, we know that shoppers prefer to shop in stores that have robots because they associate it with a better experience, and and kids love the robot being around. So I think the story is less about the bumps and much more about the momentum and providing information and insight into how to avoid the bumps or develop a road that's perhaps more smooth, if we're going to play the metaphor out. But it's pretty fun to see how much adoption is accelerating today, and the results are really real. So, to have technology that's proven to have business-wide impact, success stories, and to have amazing reception from both shoppers and store teams, I think we're entering a time where we know what the repeatable playbook is and looks like.
Sure. No, and a couple of things you just said were perfect segues to kind of getting to like the next topic that I want to touch on, which is more around, I'll call it global embracement, because again, we're not talking about just one specific region. Obviously, you referenced nine countries or 9 continents a few different times. I'm sorry. So, but lead coming into that, and looking at maybe some. We'll call it opinionated or non-educated assumptions. For again, comparing to RFID, a lot of people have said they still today say, "Oh, we're not going to look at RFID because it's too costly. The tags cost too much. The infrastructure costs too much." Or people typically grab on the cost first, or the amount of IT infrastructure and resources and such. Like, do you see some of that predetermined notions with some of the opportunities clients you're talking to, like, "Oh, we just can't do this. It's just too much of an investment, or it doesn't have an ROI." Like, just anything that you can share there.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it also underscores to JW, to your point of like, this is a really amazing moment for technology vendors to all hold hands, even for competitors, because it's where the water level gets raised for all boats involved in a certain respect.
Sure.
Ultimately, I think the biggest barrier to anything new, and I'm going to answer your question in a couple of ways, but the biggest barrier to anything new is just changing the status quo. Like, change management is tough because it involves humans doing different things in different ways. And, our industry has addressed in manual inventory checks with retail workers. That's how we've always done it. And so that's probably the largest thing to overcome in some respects. But if I go back to, even the change that I've seen in the industry in the 2 years that I've been in this role, when I started, there was disbelief in the industry that out of stocks were an industry issue and that price accuracy was something that needed to be addressed. And that's rapidly evolved. That awareness has rapidly changed. And as that has happened, then for a while, we saw confusion about, well, which sensor type is better, right? Is it fixed cameras? Is it mobile handhelds? Is it robotics? Is it something else? Right. And that has also changed, because I think that like, how do we solve the problem question has been replaced with what's the best way to get to my outcome, get to my KPI. And in many settings, what we're seeing is that a multimodal or solution is what's best, meaning robots plus fixed sensors, et cetera, et cetera. And along the way, the other like roadblocks that we've seen I should say, retail is newer to buying technology than, say, enterprise software purchasing or something like that. And so there's been an evolution where we have learned as an industry how to select technology, how to evaluate a vendor, right? Like if a vendor says they can do something, how do you know if they can actually do that thing? How do you know if you're demoing a product that it's live in the field and not just a proof of concept? Those are really hard questions to answer. And so those are all roadblocks we've seen along the way. And I would say today, the biggest one that I experience and my team experiences is really around innovation priorities. Meaning there's a lot of things on the table that could use innovation dollars in a retail setting. Right. And so, the most important question is really, how do you stack rank that? And obviously our perspective, and I will fully admit there's bias, but our perspective is that there's not much that's more central to a retail strategy than having inventory visibility that's precise, because it feeds other investments like retail media investments, like ESL investments, and so on. But ultimately, that's something that ladders up to a corporate strategy, and then the executive team needs to decide on. And so that's really where we're focused right now, and helping people prioritize.
Yeah, that makes sense. A couple of things you said too resonate. I mean, I've when I follow like research groups like IHL, and they're doing industry assessments and summaries on NRF and whatever else, they'll certainly they're very clear that this industry is one of the most advanced in terms of technology adoption and implementation. But like you said, how do you rank those from an innovation perspective? And then the other thing I've appreciated, being still newer in this industry compared to where I came from many years ago, is it's much more collaborative. Like you said, when we all kind of come together and help each other out, it's better for us all. So I definitely can resonate with some of that. And as we're talking as well, all great topics conversation thus far, and looking at the time we've been here already. So I would like to maybe take a few things and just kind of condense them to one, and move on to one other topic here in a minute. But we were looking at things that you've already touched on, but as it relates to embracement, you talked about the fact that customers, employees prefer to work in an environment that there's technology like what you have to offer. It's very clear that people get intrigued. I saw a recent LinkedIn post from your organization about a father-daughter that went out shopping. The girl always follows Tally around and kind of gets really supportive of the job that he is doing. So I think they said Tally was a boy in that girl's context. But I guess where I'm going with this is you're seeing a lot of embracement across the brand or the employee or even the customer's customer, your customer's customer. But how is that being viewed across the different regions, right? I mean, I know we're going to talk about the Simbe core site report here in a minute. There was a trade-off between US and UK adoption, but can you just maybe share some more of a geographic embracement as it relates to those different personas and what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And that's one of the most rewarding parts of scaling Simbe globally, is that every region, it really brings something unique to the table, and makes our systems stronger. I'll answer you in two ways. So the first is a region agnostic way, and then the second is more region specific. So I would say that across the world, regardless of where you are, proactive and repeated education is key. Like we talked about, this is about change management. And so we see it being very important to reassure store associates at the beginning of deployments and throughout deployments that this is a power tool that is designed to free them up to do what only they can do and what they love to do best. And, using everything from incentive programs for the highest performers to Tally sponsored store team members of the month and lunch and learns and pizza parties, for the store teams themselves. And then the same goes for shoppers. Sometimes if left to their own devices, they could get concerned, for instance, that their favorite retail workers are going to get replaced by a robot. So it's very important to educate the shopper about how the robot is a sign that the retailer cares about them as a shopper, their experience, cares about empowering the store team. You also need to reassure them about things like the fact that Tally's not taking your, images of your face, it's taking images of the shelf. And so we see that with, everything from like email and social kind of campaigns to Tally birthday parties, Tally Halloween costumes, passing out stickers and tattoos and stuffed tallies and having, picture submission contests, but everything that reaffirms what the robot is there to do. Yeah. So that's my non-geographic specific answer. And then as it gets into regional nuances, JW, I would say that some markets, the emphasis is on, emphasis is on precision in fresh categories like produce or deli, and then there are others where it's all about efficiency in high volume merchandise settings. We have seen that in Europe, there's a sharper focus on things like regulatory standards and sustainability, whereas in North America, the scale and complexity of store formats shape adoption more than others. And in Asia and the Middle East, I would say that innovation and the customer experience is really top of mind. While like in South America and LATAM, they're thinking much more about a smaller store format. And so what's really important is that this platform is scalable, but that it can be customized because every store format is slightly different. And it's kind of fun to see how much Tally loves to travel and learn new languages for signage and labeling, and then try new delicacies and all sorts of things. You can think of all the puns and places that can go in terms of like how many kinds of tea are there in Europe and in the UK and so on. So, yeah. Anyways, to your question, it's there's many things that are different, but there are the human commonalities at the core.
Well, I'm gonna throw a walk-on topic question, see if you can answer it. If not, don't worry, we'll wrap up. So you talked about if you had a pie chart and you had to break down in sections your pie chart to those different retailer types, there's grocer, fashion apparel, general merchandise. Like, how would you break your pie chart based on your customers today?
I need to be a little bit safe in how I answer you, just because I don't want to give away too much information. But I would say at a high level, grocery and supermarket and hypermarket is where we began, particularly in a regional grocery setting. We have gone up market in the last 2 years and have Fortune 500 clients that have yet to be announced to the world. Mm-hmm. And then, kind of second to that, but not far behind, are club and home improvement and farm sectors. Similarly, we have regional customers as well as very, very large ones that have not yet been announced. So that's where we have public case studies. That's where we have amazing proof points, but it's also not where we only have proof points. We also have maybe it's a slightly smaller piece of the pie, so to speak, but in pharmacy and drug as well as alcohol. And then, the apparel market and apparel and fashion is perhaps the smallest bucket right now. Although those things do change sometimes depending upon, if you're working with a particularly fast moving client. But yes, that's where the current proof points are.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you for letting me throw that that walk on topic there for you. So I know again, I try to be considerate of the time and certainly want to be respectful of yours and the audience. But I did just want to touch on for a few minutes is if it's all right with you. I referenced it a few times. I know in my last conversation with my friend JP Kamel over at RFID Sherpas, we referenced CoreSite industry reports, one of which I believe Simbe kind of co-authored, sponsored, whatever. I know I said in that previous conversation with JP, it's a very, very, very detailed report. Fully transparent. I still haven't finished reading it yet. But if you just wanted to give like the Cliff Notes version for people to steer them to that for a future deep dive, what would be like your three key takeaways, messages that you thought would be worthwhile for people to take a further look at?
Yeah, happy to do that. And we did sponsor it. We did none of the research. Of course, I did all of the research.
Okay.
For those who want to go look for it online, it's called The State of In-Store Retailing in 2025, The Dawn of the New Age Store. And I think it really highlights the urgent need to digitize stores with things like AI and automation. And it, at a high level, it shows how top retailers are closing execution gaps in their stores with those technologies. In terms of the three main takeaways from the report, the first is, and I'll kind of take us on a trajectory of like the problem and the cause of the problem as well as the solution. The cost of inefficiency and mounting margin pressure in the store is really growing. Retailers now lose over 5.5% of annual sales and over 5% of annual margin to store inefficiencies that retail technology can help with. The cause, this is the second thing, the cause of those inefficiencies are labor related challenges, which are causing execution gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And the labor related challenges that are really driving this issue is shrink, manual tasks, and high employee turnover. Those are the biggest contributors to store inefficiencies. And the store inefficiencies show up in three main areas, with promotion execution being the top one, followed by pricing errors and missing or misplaced items, so on shelf availability.
Okay.
And then the last finding is related to the rising use of technology and investment momentum. So the report showed that 2/3 of retailers have begun implementing store technology, but only 20% have fully scaled the technology. So what that means is there's a significant opportunity for early movers that is still available, but it won't last long because investments in store technology has grown 151% in the last 12 months. And the largest area of investment is robotics. So it's kind of like that competitive door or window of opportunity. The door is closing is kind of the high level way to summarize it.
Well, you condensed 21 pages into 2 or 3 minutes, so thank you.
GPT does great things.
well, well, again, I know time's of the essence for everybody. So I guess kind of in just wrapping it up, and obviously, grateful for your time to join me today. Anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to call out, or where can we see you next through end of the year and into the next year? But just final thoughts on your end.
Yeah, thank you, JW. We will be at Grocery Shop in the Store of Tomorrow area of the investment floor. Some of our customers will be on the stage there, as will our CEO. So really excited to see folks and catch up in person. And just thank you for the microphone that you give to these kind of topics. I love listening every week as you've gotten this started.
Well, thank you very much, and definitely looking forward to seeing this one shared with everybody here in the foreseeable future. So appreciate your time and look forward to talking again very soon.
And fun. Thank you.
Thank you much.
20th century hangover with leadership has been focused on skilling and upskilling. Whereas what we're saying here, let's develop the transformative capacity and the muscle that leaders have so that whatever they face, whatever comes at them, that they can embrace that and lead through times of uncertainty. So in a nutshell, that's the idea of what TQ and the TQ suite embraces.
Welcome back to Beyond the Tech. Over the past episodes, we've explored the evolution of business processes and the realities of transformation and the rapid advances in tech that are reshaping our industry. In some ways, we have sort of, in the previous conversations, landed on leadership as the key unlock for this transformation and how we all get through it. And so leadership is a vital component that underpins the changes that our industry is undergoing. And so today we'll be diving into what it means to lead in the time of AI and how leadership itself is being transformed and what it takes to guide organizations and people through this era of unprecedented change. Today's conversation is with a thought leader who is uniquely positioned to unpack our thinking around leading in this fast-paced industry that we find ourselves in. I'm joined today by Paul McCarthy from Canvas Leadership. Paul's a best-selling author, a thought leader in this space, and if you consider yourself a transformational leader or a team of a team or a global organization, you really should get some value from this conversation. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Vic, thank you. Pleasure to be here. It's great to see you again. I know you're driving a lot of the conversations that Microsoft are having with AI, and as we evolve in that industry, and I obviously was really fortunate to meet you as part of a recent client piece of work that we were involved in, and you gave me the luxury of your time to chat afterwards about this topic. So, yeah, good to be back here.
Yes. So is there anything that I left out of your intro? I did the short bio. You are a man of many talents. Is there anything you want to share with our audience about Paul?
Well, really just that I guess I've been in this era of leadership and helping organizations transform for many years. And I think AI is, and we'll come to this throughout the conversation, I'm sure, AI is certainly a disruptor. And yet I just want to, bake in the minds for the audience here that AI is not necessarily a new thing. We have had AI in some context for a number of years. And so I just want to bake that into the conversation because AI is a disruptor and it's not new. And it's also part of an overall schematic of disruption that's happening across the world. So I'm sure we're going to unpack that a little bit more. So I'm really excited to see where this takes us and know that really what we're trying to do is help prepare leaders to evolve and thrive in a 21st century world.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. I was intrigued by the publication from Canvas Leadership that you shared with me, leading frontier firms, right? And primarily because this notion of frontier firm is aligned with what I believe is some of the best future of work research that the company that I work for, Microsoft, has published in many years. And so I can't even remember something that was as impactful to me reading, what it would be like to have this notion of digital employees, right? And having a mix of employees that you onboard, some digital, some human. And it really speaks to the need to lead differently. And we're going to talk about that today. But when a leader can describe an outcome to a digital employee and have that employee work with other humans and agents to accomplish a task, it challenges our traditional thinking around how to accomplish a task and what employee engagement looks like, incentives, and the like. And so, Paul, perhaps to get started, you can share with us what inspired your focus on this context of AI and transformational leadership.
Yeah, and I think it's a topical question that a lot of leaders are having, and really kind of reframing what it means to be a leader in this time is an uncomfortable conversation because it leads to a lot of discoveries that perhaps we know that that we need to address, and yet we haven't been addressing. And what do I mean by that? I think, we need to surface the discomfort with the fact that the way we've done leadership up until now hasn't really prepared us for the future. So we have an approach to leadership where a lot of our focus tends to be on the upskilling side of leadership. Well, actually, in an era of evolving AI, and I said that's just one disruptive influence, we need to rethink how we do leadership. So we almost need to reboot and rewire our entire approach to how we look at leadership. And so for me, I think just surfacing that now, it creates the environment for us to have the conditions where we talk about the different kind of leader that's needed. And so, the research you've done at Microsoft, which is obviously world renowned and very held in very high esteem. One of the things that our research and our work does is actually, how do you then take that concept and lead in a different kind of firm? And I think, again, it's not about the upskilling, it's about rewiring how we look at leadership. And I think that whole rebooting leadership and approaching it differently is what Canvas has developed on what we call TQ, Transformative Quotient. And so, I was talking with you behind the scenes around, how do we kind of summarize this whole concept of TQ? And essentially it's this: how do we develop the transformative capacity of our leaders? And how do we get them comfortable in ambiguity? How do we get them to pivot? How do we get them to continually adapt? And whilst the approach that we take is, characterized by a methodology with 3 phases, 6 steps, 12 conditions, I'm not going to go into that detail here. I think the premise really is important to drive home that it's about, how do you prepare leaders when there is uncertainty? How do you instill in them the ability to pivot and adapt when they need to evolve the way they lead? And I think the almost 20th century hangover with leadership has been focused on skilling and upskilling. Whereas what we're saying here, let's develop the transformative capacity and the muscle that leaders have, so that whatever they face, whatever comes at them, that they can embrace that and lead through times of uncertainty. So in a nutshell, that's the idea of what TQ and the TQ suite embraces. And I know that from obviously a lot of your listeners in the retail space, they're transforming their businesses. They're going through different ways of working, different services that are needed, different ways to connect with their customers and consumers. And I think at the heart of that, Vic, is this idea that we need to evolve our mindset about what it takes to be a leader in this space as well. So I'm curious on some of your thoughts, perhaps.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that is skilling and developing a TQ mindset are a bit different, right? So skilling says I can teach you something and then you can practice it on your own. And in TQ, this transformational quotient, right? It sits beside IQ and EQ. So this is a new notion for many of us. It's something that needs to evolve because, and we'll get into it, but it's not a destination. It is in fact a journey. Do you see it as a circle? How do you sort of think about that? And then I'll answer your question.
Yeah, no, I see it as a continual journey. It never ends. And I think the fact that we are in a disruptive time means that we also need to disrupt our thinking about what it means to be a leader in those times. So, and we saw that at one of our recent clients with PepsiCo, which I can go into a little bit in more detail. But I think the point to make here is that this isn't a kind of a process that you start and finish, and then if you're successful. It's a continual evolution. And so leaders in this time of AI are now starting to surface the uncomfortable questions, which are, what kind of leader do I want to be in an evolving era of AI? Yeah. Has the approach to leadership that I've had up until now worked? What needs to evolve going forward? So these are really deep, reflective questions. And I think what we need to remember here is, what's the story we're telling ourselves about us as transformative leaders? And so I think that reflection, again, we talked about that offline, is really important. And actually, it's pretty much missing from the way that we've approached the story of leadership in the past.
Yeah. And so you asked me, what's my perspective on AI's role? And
Mm,
for me, the shift came when I realized that AI isn't just a tool, right? It's a partner in decision making, right? And as a leader, I've challenged myself to think through my own workflow, right? And a defining moment for me came when I started to think about outcomes and not the
mm,
process to achieve the outcome, right? So as tenured leaders in this space, we understand the process, right? And we can skill people to follow that rote process that we have. And I'll give you an example. If I need to prepare to meet with the CEOs who operate retail brands inside of a company like Berkshire Hathaway, right? Many retail brands. I would typically start with researching the plans of each of those companies, right? And then I would look for commonality to determine what sort of solution or approach might have the broadest impact to their business. And I would tell you that would be a multi-week effort in terms of elapsed time.
mm.
With AI, I can have an 80% answer in about 4 minutes. Right. It's a completely different approach. And so now I don't need to think about, where to get the 10Ks and where to get their strategy presentations and where to listen to, the commentary around their reporting. And that sort of change requires a complete rethink. It did for me, and how I assign work and how we set expectations for an outcome. Right. And so with an 80% answer, I would add a day to sort of vet that approach that was given back, right? And then move forward. And right. And so the net savings there can be significant. Now that's just me, right? What will that do to the work inside the organization? And so, I'm challenging myself to be what I like to call directionally correct. I say it almost
Mm.
every day. It's directionally correct. Which is very difficult for someone who's grown up in retail, in a retail mindset where precision is king, right? And we've spent our careers trying to call the ball, so to speak, on everything from category performance, time to completion, and many other aspects of the operating environment. And so it's been an unlock for me.
And with that, I think that comes this concept of trust. And so, like, are we? How do we relate to AI? I mean, there's obviously a lot of client experiences that we could both reference in terms of how people are calibrating their relationship around AI, and there's no doubt that it's very clear that we can begin to outsource certain tasks as a leader to AI, and that results in efficiencies and productivity savings, which then leaves us with something else, which is around as a leader. There's two things that I want to pull the thread on here, which I think you're going to be interested in, but particularly the second one. What that now tries to introduce again to us is the art of storytelling as a leader. So once we've outsourced all of these other tasks that we used to do to AI, we're now left to reconnect with what it really means to be a leader. And to be a leader, you have to have a story that you tell. You have to connect with people emotionally on many different layers. That's the first point. But the second point, again, as leaders are kind of grabbing their life jackets and swimming in this sea of uncertainty with AI, is the relationship that they're building with AI and whether or not it's one of trust. And so for me, I've seen it with leaders firsthand, with clients and the experiences that they've had. And I'll come on to talk about that in a bit. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what are you seeing out there? Like, are leaders distrusting AI? How do you make sure that leaders and their teams are feeling more empowered when they start to embrace the potential that AI has?
It's interesting you sort of pull on that trust thread, because I've experienced that trust is foundational, and leaders need to create a cycle of safety, making it clear that AI is here to augment the work we're doing, not to replace it. And it's about defining that relationship with AI and not being led by it, right? And perhaps now is a great time to surface the elephant in the room, right? And many leaders feel uncertain about their relationship with AI, right? And do you have a perspective on how to go about reframing that for leadership? And I know that you do, but it's sort of a loaded question. But as we reframe it for the leader, that they can experience, some of what I did, and that is, I'm seeing value. It's not about forcing it on individuals, but show them value, let them find their own value, let them explore and that sort of thing. So that's sort of how I think about it.
Yeah, and I know a lot of your listeners in the retail space, if they're retail leaders, they're going to be experiencing and grappling with some of this discomfort and the uncertainty that I'm about to raise with an example, really, from an organization that we worked with, PepsiCo, quite a large brand. And then, in fact, that's how you and I met when we were supporting PepsiCo. And that's where we had the privilege of meeting you and some others in Microsoft. And this is a real life example of a leader. Like as Canvas, we were supporting PepsiCo to develop their top global leaders. And the program was devised of some upfront coaching, 4 days in-person learning, and a post-program coaching program. And so one of the leaders that I was coaching was kind of grappling with this question and the uncertainty and the lack of trust in AI, but also in themselves as a leader. How do I relate to this artificial intelligence? It's doing a lot of my work as a leader. How do I, and there's a sense of imposter syndrome that comes from that as well. And so what this leader did, and interestingly, there's an icing on the cake here afterwards when I tell the story, because they were going through a transformative experience and they didn't necessarily know how to label it. So they started to notice patterns that no longer served them as a leader. So they started to document what those patterns were. They intentionally sat in the messiness of it all, because as leaders, we want to move along and get things done and be efficient and track things and move on to the next thing. It takes intentional courage to pause in that middle where there's a lot of uncertainty and insecurity. We all have it as leaders. Not a lot of us express that, though. So sitting in that and getting curious with it is the key here. And this leader was able to get curious, start to disrupt the way they were thinking about things that no longer served them. And what that then presents, Vic, is an opportunity that every leader, especially in the retail sector, has right now, is to then imagine what new possibilities there could be. So you have to upset and disrupt the way that you previously thought in order to move through this chrysalis effect, actually. And so once this leader was at that point, they were able to take the responsibility that they needed to move their leadership through and actually recalibrate their relationship with AI. And so I think, as an example, this is not an isolated incident. This leader was unwittingly going through the 6 steps that belong to TQ, which will provide more input at some point, either in this conversation or post. And they were going through that experience. It wasn't pleasant. It was painful. And at the end of it, they had clarity on their relationship with AI. And I'll save a little icing on the cake of that story for maybe later in our conversation around what that process enabled that leader to do.
Yeah, I think that for me, when I saw the movement in our business related to AI, in some ways not, right? And you have to recognize that you might be seeing changes further down in the value stream or the supply chain that are related to decisions that were made much faster and without all of the typical rhythm of the business, right? And so when I started to see this is chaos, right? This is a chaotic situation. And then, through being curious, I hadn't thought of it that way, but being curious, you start to see it as an opportunity. It made me rethink how leaders, myself included, can continually transform, right? So when you try to squash chaos, right? If you see it as chaos, and then I again ask myself, and this is the reflective thing that it's easy to unpack here with you on a screen, but as in my own business, it's hard to sort of be vulnerable and say, actually, I think this is chaos and we've got to make it stop, but really, that it's not going to stop. And I suppose that's what you mean about TQ is how how is it elastic, this notion of TQ, but how sort of resilient is your brain to sort of is your leadership acumen to sort of take it as it comes? Because we all, again, would like to say, I need to some certainty in my business, right? If I'm facing disruption every day, that's not a place that I'm used to living in. And so I just wonder, is it elastic the way you think about it?
Well, it's interesting that your comment about chaotic, because actually out of chaos comes the answer. So in, again, these increasingly disruptive times when we previously wanted certainty and now we've got chaos, and I'm sure we'll touch upon this as well, that chaos is that new norm. The disruption is that new norm. So getting used to that, and actually as you go through, to your point around whether this is elastic or not, this is a continual process. It's a journey that never ends. And so really what it's about at the heart, to be able to navigate these uncertainties and this chaos, it's about how do we create that transformation muscle, so what we call transformative capacity, so that whatever is thrown at you, you're able to flex and pivot and adapt in the moment. Whereas, leadership upskilling, leadership development programming tends to prepare you for a certain kind of leadership, gives you these generic approaches and qualities. What we're saying with TQ and this ability to develop your the transformative muscle, is that actually you have the ability to unlock your ability to transform as a leader. So we're relying less on external variables. And as you evolve through the experience of transforming yourself as a leader, just like the leader in PepsiCo did, they were able to imagine a new world where chaos was normalized, and they had developed the environment and the almost like the tool set to be able to cope with that. So being comfortable in ambiguity and knowing that and again, that's something that you're smiling there, so you probably got something that resonates with you. So I'm curious on what are you hearing in that area? What are you feeling?
It's funny, that's that concept, right? You might, for the audience, right, you might hear being comfortable with ambiguity, and you say, yeah, I'm totally comfortable with ambiguity, but we're talking about ambiguity from all sides, like complete 360 ambiguity. You're not actually sure, right, what the next step is, right? So we can all deal with ambiguity around in the retail and consumer goods business, weather and external impacts. You mentioned that, right? But what if the ambiguity is on how everything's going as planned, and we're seeing either an uplift or a dip in our business, right? Which generally, and you say, okay, you're looking for the chaos, right? So I can deal with ambiguity. I'll go look for the problem. And what you're saying is take a step back, right? And you called it transformation capacity. The capacity, transformative capacity, is to take a different view of this problem, this age-old problem, right? And it's I think unique for leaders who have grown up, right, in the business, right? For SVPs and chiefs of businesses, chief revenue officers who have seen enough that they've reached this, what it feels like a pinnacle, right? And so ambiguity is something that I would think that all of them would say, I'm comfortable doing that. And so I smiled because I think you're suggesting something altogether different than what we see as normal ambiguity, right? I need you to go fix this problem. If I'm a young merchant, I might say, okay, what levers do I have to fix the problem, right? And so you'd say you would ask the question. If I'm a tenured merchant, I would say, I don't need to know which levers, I already know. And I will discern which levers. And now I'm saying, especially in this world where you have digital employees and they are making autonomous decisions, right? We're getting a little deep here, but we try not to go into too much tech here, Paul. So I have folks like you who are really big brained who can help me stay out of the bits and bytes. But
well, thank you.
So how do we pull up and see it differently? And so when you said ambiguity, I thought, wow, I think half of the audience would say, I've got that covered, but it's something altogether different.
Well, and it is a common term, and I think just unpacking it from a leadership perspective a little bit before we move on is the idea that how we've approached thinking about ambiguity and uncertainty and disruptive influences, that's what we're saying needs to evolve. So, and being comfortable sitting in that. So sitting in that, as I said earlier, that messy middle, and doing that by intentionally taking some time to reflect. I mean, it happened with me, and as a personal anecdotal story, as I've been evolving my own capacity and capability with AI, I've started to shift the way that I imagine using AI and for what, as well as, I mean, the ambiguity, the chaos doesn't go away. I'm just now leveraging a different approach to help me as I start to go through that process. And I think, you mentioned earlier about the elastic nature of this and whether it's elastic. I think what we're doing with transformation and this whole concept of the TQ suite is it's almost like a roadmap. It's a blueprint with a set of guidance and guardrails to help leaders navigate that ambiguity, navigate that disruption, and know that, whereas perhaps outdated systems and approaches wanted us to get to the answer quickly, this is about sitting and stewing in it and being in the petri dish and evolving your perspective as you move through it. And so that is what enables you to get curious and imagine new possibilities, and then shift your mindset and then plan what you're going to be doing as a leader. And I think it's a very subtle shift. And I think one of the things,
it doesn't sound subtle, right? When you said sit in it and deal with it, but you're saying daily sit in it, right? Anyone can do the war room approach of, I'm going to sit in this problem because I have no choice, right? It's consuming, whether it's my business or my boss or something, right? It's consuming, so I have to deal with it. You're saying, no, this is kind of the new norm. And so, at Pepsi, you and I were just together for a small time. Was there a breakthrough? And we won't give away any sort of trade secrets or anything, but have you seen your clients, perhaps broadly, have a breakthrough, and what has been the outcome for them?
Yeah, well, with that particular leader that I mentioned, they went from, almost a skeptical, having done things a certain way, going through this process, coming out the other side, modeling the transformation themselves. And they, as an aside, they have a responsibility now as a leader to take that approach into their peer network and in who they're working with as a leader, which they're doing very well. And as a result of that whole process that they went through, they were tapped on the shoulder to basically lead PepsiCo in a new area of digital transformation that had never been done before. And so I'm in no way am I suggesting that this process that we went through with this leader directly contributed to that. But it is an interesting concept because philosophically, their approach to leadership shifted and evolved, which allowed them to be open to new ways of thinking and new possibilities. And now they're running a bigger part of the portfolio in their area within PepsiCo. And so just to kind of think about that from a retail leader perspective, imagine what could be possible if we opened and shifted our mindset to what transformation really is and what kind of leader we needed to be to drive that transformation.
Yeah, it's I talked about moving to outcomes, right? And but disconnecting the outcome from the process, right? That's the part that I think you have to sit in. You say, I want to get this outcome. Okay, first we do this, right? And you go, hold on, you're doing process again, right? We're just doing the outcome. What are the levers? And so while you're not suggesting that, come to Canvas, do a, multi-day workshop or maybe multi-week, and boom, your remit gets broadened and you're well thought of. But I hear what you might be suggesting, right, is that senior leaders, because, offline we talked about whether a leader could achieve this kind of growth without going through a TQ motion, without understanding TQ and at least the concepts around, I have to get used to the various aspects of it. And I look forward to going through it myself. But are you suggesting that senior leaders are looking for leaders who are embracing this. And you kind of mentioned it, this and the wider disruption to put them in front. So when I'm faced with disruption, perhaps I'm not ready as a CEO, right? And I can't take the time or don't want to take the time this stage of my career to go wallow in the messy middle. But I need someone who will absolutely do that. It's very likely not one level down or the most obvious person. Is this a new selection criteria?
Well, I mean, you raised something really interesting here. It is another elephant in the room, which I think we talk about around more of a macro level as well. You're looking at an organizational and a leader level, but I want to just kind of caveat what I'm about to talk through with the idea that, you know, we're never going back to what we thought was the new norm, the normal, right? So we are in a different world now where disruption is the norm. And so constant disruption is part of our landscape and our DNA of working in organizations. And I think, you know, we mentioned earlier, AI is a core disruptor, but there's other disruptors: geopolitical impacts, tariffs, climate change, workforce optimization. You know, there's a whole set of disruptions that every leader, whether they're retail or other industries and sectors, has to start preempting, starting to plan for, embracing, moving through, and sustaining, right? And so I just want to context set here that actually those leaders that want their leaders to embrace disruption and a different kind of approach to leading, we need to start to shift our understanding of disruption. So we usually think of disruption as a negative, as a bad thing. And by the way, I think it's interesting to note that transformation and disruption are essentially the same thing, right? We just don't like the word disruption because it carries some negative connotations. And so the point I want to kind of drill down into, maybe retail, this is actually very relevant for retail, is because retail drives economic growth within different countries around the world, right? And there's a survey, and it was done by the Global Innovation Index. And every year they come up with a report that basically measures and assesses and documents the top 25 countries around the world by GDP growth, and the bottom 25 that are not growing their economies. And one of the things that they've unequivocally suggested is that the GDP growth of a country is directly linked to the ability of that country to be innovative. And the innovation of that country is then directly mapped to the ability of organizations to be able to identify, recruit, onboard, and develop leaders that have more transformative, disruptive qualities. So simply put, if an organization doesn't begin to embrace leaders that think differently and go through, you know, from a TQ perspective of transforming the way they lead and disrupting their thinking in order to achieve and imagine and achieve different possibilities and outcomes. What I'm saying is there's now data that shows those organizations won't be successful in driving the continued economic growth and prosperity at a country level. So if I think about this and rip off the Band-Aid, we need a different kind of leader that will actually help us embrace not just economic growth, but continually help us thrive in the organizations that we serve. So I've said quite a lot there. I want to just pause to see how this is kind of resonating with you and how it's, you know, how it's moving through your system.
Yeah, I think that I'm absolutely processing it as I hope the audience is as well, and sort of internalizing. So maybe this is that sit in it portion, right? And we will talk for, I don't know, just a little less than an hour today. But sitting in it now, I am processing. Number one, am I that kind of leader, right? And whether it matters, Paul, and maybe you can talk to this, whether it matters the industry or the domain within the industry, right? So if you think about just retail simply, buy, move, plan, sell, right? So does it matter? Would you say that, because you did at a country level, I love that macro view that you did. So you're saying it kind of doesn't matter. You can't, there's no respite. There's no place to hide from this disruption, right? I'll go hang out in supply chain because that's rock solid. It's physical, it's known. And so what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, it's industry agnostic, essentially. So this approach to transforming the way we lead in these increasingly disruptive times, that's the new norm, right? So obviously retail has different nuances and a different story and a different set of disrupting influences at different times than other industries or sectors. The point still remains, which is we haven't really been preparing our leaders to be comfortable in the discomfort that comes from undulating forces and disruptive influences. So what we're saying is, why not focus on that side to prepare leaders in a way that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, whatever comes at them, whether it's new competitors requiring them to change the way they provide services, whether it's AI shifting the way that supply chain operates in a retail business, it doesn't really matter what the disruption is. It's preparing leaders so no matter what that disruption is, they can navigate it with ease. I'm not saying ease is easy, of course, but they can navigate it because they've got the tool set to do that. And by the way, Vic, I mean, as we shift our approach to leadership, we're also shifting the way we lead, and that is impacting our identity as a leader. So again, as we think about this, this is no longer just a, hey, I'm a leader, I'm moving into this space. What skills do I need? This is what relationship do I want to have with all of these disruptive influences? And how does that make me a better leader? How do I thrive as a leader going forward? And to do that work, we need to be open and willing to do some of that reflection internally first. And I think that's easy to say, it's hard to do.
Yeah. So it's, we're still sort of hanging out on this concept of trusting, right? And maybe the disruption is you have to trust, again, 360, right? Trust in tech, we think about trust the data, right? And you mentioned a study. It was what was the name of the study? Global
Innovation Index.
Global Innovation Index. And so many of us read these studies and they say, well, that's great for the Emirates or, some country in Africa, but what does that got to do with me? Right. And I do think we have a responsibility, right? And this responsibility is intertwined with AI, right? And while we're saying AI, you notice you're talking about interpersonal human traits, right? As you're talking about leaders and that. So it's not just about results, right? It's about how we deliver on the responsibility that empowers our people to adapt and innovate. Right. So in many episodes ago, we talked about the different guests. We talked about needing to have different metrics. Right. So if you leave, and I experience this right now, even it's part of the journey that I'm going through in my organization, is when you leave the metric the same, it says, right. So the metric is static, but you want everything upstream of that to be disruptive. Right. And so that's tough to sort of swallow. And so you say, I'm not going to take responsibility for taking a new journey when the metric, I know how tried and true, I'm 85% accurate on the objective. I have no idea how accurate I am using this, TQ approach, just sort of, going with it and taking on new information as it comes and seeing where it takes me. And so it's funny, when we were in the breakout room with some leaders and we talked about, I think I mentioned, you should take this opportunity to think bold, right? To think bold. Ask yourself, what are flavor profiles? What are case pack sizes that might disrupt the business and bring you better results, right? And I said, you have to do that now, because when will you get this chance, right? And that seemed like a call to action in the moment. And you stopped and said, actually, right, based on the transformation that the leader has had, we want you to, this is an ongoing, right? You mentioned, I didn't know at the time, you were saying, oh no, this is an ever present way to think, right? We can be constrained. And so I think it's good to get used to this continual disruption.
Well, also on that one, Vic, one of the values of PepsiCo, the leaders, is to take bigger swings. So that's one of their in their lexicon. Again, that's public knowledge. And I say that in this context because the leaders that we work with have been given permission by the C-suite to be bold and disrupt their thinking. And actually, as I said with the example of that leader earlier, that presented quite a bit of discomfort for that leader. And it's almost like that you're giving me permission to lead in a different way. And now we need to put the scaffolding in place that says the scaffolding that we had before may not be relevant for where we're going in this mindset of a leader, that we're being actively encouraged to change things up, to disrupt, to imagine new things. And the metric point you made is an interesting one, because when you go through that process upstream as a leader to shift the way you lead and the way you're imagining what your focus is going to change into, you will actually shift and evolve your metric. So the metric now changes as well, because as you're reimagining a new future with new possibilities, new types of services, new ways of delivering services to your customers, the metric on that has to evolve as well. And so that end to end is actually, it sounds linear, but it's anything but. And so, and again, it's that that's going to be the normal state of play. So for me, as a parting message on this part of our conversation, it's almost like, how do we normalize the conversation that disruption is a good thing?
How do we normalize? Let me say that. How do we normalize the conversation that disruption is going to be a constant thing?
It is a good thing and a constant, and therefore the kind of leader that we need has to be able to tap in to the transformative capacity that they've developed.
It's a glass half full situation. There's a win in here somewhere. My business is upside down using, my legacy paradigm. There must be a win. This is a sign that I can go extract even more value based on this disruption. And maybe now, Paul's the time to pause and tell the audience that we're not purposely obfuscating and keeping away from going into the depths of the research that you've done and the process that you have. Your ebook is a free ebook. And so people will be able to read and kind of get a primer on this. And we'll put some images up in on the graphics just so you can kind of see what we're talking about. But I think we were both conscious that we didn't want to try to go into the 3-6-12 program and have all of these things. It takes multiple days to get through this and to think about it. And so I just wanted to let the audience know that there is help for this concept that we're talking to. If it sounds like we're talking around it, it is in fact as messy as it sounds, you and I talking through it.
Well, yeah, and I think there's two premises really that at the heart of this that I would ask people to think about as a leader, which is, what's the story that you have around transformation, and what does transformation mean to you, and also what is your leadership story, and think about how does that story of you being a leader need to evolve in these transformative times. And the answers to those two questions, Vic, they are the entry points to talking more about the transformative quotient, TQ. And they start with us individually asking ourselves those questions. And everybody is at a different point in their openness and willingness and journey there. Yeah. But I think they're questions that need to be asked in these times regardless, because there is a lot of discomfort. There is a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of conversations that we're having with leaders in different environments where leaders are scratching their heads and they're thinking, the way that we've done it needs to evolve. We're not sure if it's going to help the way we used to do it in the future. How do we, like, leaders are needing help and they're asking for help. And so that's what I would invite people to consider.
Interesting. Now, when maybe another sort of concept to unpack here is we've said leader probably, I don't know, 150 times in this short talk. And one of the questions I ask you is, are you intentionally saying leader because you're thinking about, the gray-haired folks among us like myself who have grown up in a model, a methodology, and are working? And I ask you, does it preclude the early 30s merchant or seller? Does it preclude them from thinking through this as well? Can they disrupt without, seeing themselves as a leader? And I would tell you that if you're running a business inside of a company like PepsiCo and you're, only 4% of the business to hundreds of thousands of people, you are leading, right? You are leading. So maybe you can help us understand this. Can you define leadership as it relates to, so what does it take to be a leader, or to be categorized as a leader? Do I need to have the title?
Well, short answer is you don't have to have or need the title. And I think there's a lot of literature research out there that says for and says against. And one of the things you mentioned, which is interesting just to pick up on, is this concept of, how relevant is the need to shift and evolve our approach to leadership? Is it just at one end of the scale of leadership, or is it across the board? I would say it's particularly important for emerging leaders and future leaders. We already know from the research that emerging leaders, aspiring managers who want to become leaders, they don't want to lead in the way that their predecessors have. Okay. That's an uncomfortable reality to accept, but all the data, all the research shows that. So that, as a macro trend, is already priming and almost setting up the stage as an external variable and that we need to listen to. So simply put, the way that we've done leadership up until now requires a reinvestment, a rethinking, a rebooting. So the emerging leader population is right now coming into the leadership ranks. These are the folks that we need to start thinking about how we help to transform their approach to leadership. That's not to say every other leader level is discounted. Far from it. I think at any point in your journey as a leader, you can remain open to this experience of shifting the way you look at leadership. So that's my thoughts there. And I think particularly, I won't drop research into this, but there's lots of different sources that we can provide after the fact that shows that the population of emerging leaders is growing at an exponential rate, and yet their preparedness for being a leader in these evolving times, there's a gap, and there's an opportunity, and so there is a gap that we need to address.
Wow! Again, to the audience, the viewers here and listeners, this platform, Conversations on Retail, has been fascinating for me because as I meet people like you, Paul, who I think about on the plane ride home and the next day, and let me get his email. We have to talk more. Who I sort of can't get out of my mind because you've sort of burrowed in. That's really what this platform is about, and so I hope that the audience is getting a taste of the value that somebody like you can bring, and this platform is adding value to the audience. And so I do thank you for being your willingness to share. You're not selling anything necessarily. You're open for business if folks want to use your consultancy to work their way through that. But as we wrap up, perhaps you could talk to us about advice. And you've given us a lot of advice, but maybe some concrete advice, if takeaways, if you will, or go-dos to how to work through this disruptive influences in our business.
Well, I think as a leader, remaining open to everything that surfaces. I think that's really important because it's almost like the entry point for transforming the way that you approach leadership and building your transformative capacity. So that remaining open is critical. I think one of the other things is kind of giving yourself permission as part of that remaining open, giving yourself permission to reimagine, to think about things differently. And so because something has been done a certain way for so long, does that always mean that that is relevant going forward? And I think, I started this conversation at the top of the hour by saying that we need to be open to rethinking, rebooting, rewiring the way we look at leadership. That also means that we need to be open to looking and taking risks with the way that we lead. So trying new things, being curious, staying open to what surfaces from that. Of course, looking at feedback that you get from your peers as part of that as well. But I think it's giving yourself permission, like the leader in PepsiCo did. And they were given that permission to take bigger swings. And that permeates at all different levels in organizations, of course. And so I think that there's some kind of takeaways for me that I would want to leave the audience with.
No, thank you. I suppose that if I had some parting thoughts for folks in the industry that are my peers and those that I've worked with and who are contemporaries, so to speak, is I would just say that, to especially those of us who've been at this a while, right, to understand the value of that, the value of your own personal knowledge is lessening. That's a scary thought, talking about sitting in it, right? Like actually what you know is becoming very less important. We have an agent who can do that in as I mentioned earlier, minutes. Your value's more now about guidance and timing, right? And understanding the intersections between your business and perhaps your supplier business, if you're in retail, understanding their culture, right? What are their constraints that may not be available? It's not a data thing, but that they have challenges or they have constraints, and just to stay open for that journey. And so that's what I would say is to your value. That might be the thing that causes the TQ shift, right? When you look around and say, actually, my 30 years into business kind of doesn't matter anymore because it's changing so fast going forward that I'm not even sure it's relevant. And you said that earlier, and I kind of got a little shiver, to say that, wow, I need to rethink and fast.
Well, not necessarily fast.
Okay.
Not just yes, you could, but just for clarity, when I personally, as Paul McCarthy, have been sitting in this petri dish of messiness and things that surface, my propensity as an individual, as a human, and as a leader is to move through it fast. And that's where we need that self-censorship and that self-accountability piece, which is to say, I notice that I want to move through this fast. Where's that coming from? What pressures? And also say the answer, the work, is sitting in it and sitting in it in a way where we're marinating in it. And I know that might be counter to a lot of the pace of the business world, but it's that discomfort that surfaces in you to sit, because that's then what gets you to rethink your identity as a leader. And that's the work, Vic. But the propensity, which by the way is normal, I'm sharing that with you. My normal response is to say, no, I want to get through this as quickly as possible. But actually put the brake on, stop pumping the gas, and actually sit and give yourself permission to sit with that. And that's the journey.
Interesting. And so is it perhaps a safety blanket? These are baby steps, Paul, if we're going to go slow. Perhaps the baby steps would be, there is value from sitting in it that will actually, slow down to go fast, that will actually accelerate once you unlock it by not trying to push through it. You'll see the acceleration. That's really the promise of this new, this fourth sort of technological advancement with AI, right? The revolution is it can actually change the pace if you give it time to do it. So thanks for giving me that. But and thank you again for your time, Paul. And I mentioned, you're open for business. And this, I wanted to bring your thoughts to the audience so that they could start having these conversations with their team. I have a few people on my team who I've started to say, what does it mean to, you gave me it was an Adam Grant notion that you gave me. It had deviance in it. What was it?
So that was actually Adam Grant's leveraged that work, but it was actually researched originally by a lady called Diane Vaughan. And Diane Vaughan wrote a book around the unfortunate tragedy of the Challenger space shuttle disaster. And she wrote a book which surfaced this concept of normalized deviance. And what she meant by that was that, and this is quite uncomfortable for listeners, I think, because that disaster was very, very tragic and defining in many ways. That disaster could have been averted if certain behaviors and activities and ways of working that were deviant, that were dysfunctional, if they were not normalized. So in other words, the culture of NASA had actually, and this is all on the record, so this is all free to speak about because it was the result of inquiries and research afterwards. Certain behaviors that were normalized that led to certain other things not being realized and not being seen at the time they needed to be seen. And had they have been, this disaster could have been averted. And so the concept applies to disruption in the sense of, in a different way though, because we've almost demonized disruption. We talked about it in this negative sense. What I'm saying is, instead of normalizing deviance, why don't we create an environment where we normalize disruption? So we talk about it openly and above board, which then embeds one of the questions you asked me earlier, which is how do leaders want other leaders to lead in times of disruption, and how does that look? Well, if we normalize the conversation, then what we're actually doing, Vic, is we're welcoming it, we're embracing it, we're allowing it to join us at the table, and we're preparing our leaders to be able to lead in those disruptive and transformative times. So yeah, this concept of normalized deviance is also one of the remnants and a legacy of the 20th century way of thinking about leadership. And so again, as we move forward to 21st century leadership, we need to create different conditions and different environments. And that's an example of where they found that you could have done something different, which would have had a different outcome.
Interesting. Thanks again. I think that our hour's about up. We like this content to be snackable. And this is, this long form's a little more than a snack. It's maybe heavy hors d'oeuvres. But I will share with the audience that we will put a link to your free ebook that gives you kind of will add some color to what we've been talking about in the notes. And I'll offer, final thoughts to you in terms of what you might, and maybe those were your final thoughts, but any parting words for the group?
Yeah, as I said, it is really staying open, staying curious, and basically having that self-reflective capability where you're asking yourself, what kind of leader do I want to be going forward? And, sitting with whatever surfaces. And that is the work. That's the final thought that I have, because I think that is key to evolving ourselves, not just as humans, but as leaders as well.
The work of the work. I love it. Well, let's stay connected, Paul. There's much more work to do, both inside of me and to sort of spread this in the community as we all deal with this disruption. And so thank you again, audience, for joining us on Beyond the Tech, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Vic. Appreciate it.